Hello, and welcome to Kindred Spirits Book Club, the podcast where two grown ladies geek out about Anne of Green Gables. I'm Reagan Duffy, and I'm here with my beautiful co-host, Kelly Gerner. Today, we're in the back end of our conversations about Rilla of Ingleside with a discussion about prophecy and public opinion.
Yeah, so that might sound like those two ideas don't connect, but we will get there. We were really fascinated by Ellen Montgomery's inclusion of these like prophetic dreams that Miss Oliver has. And as we started discussing why those are part of the book, we came to realize that those dreams were part of a broader pattern that we were seeing throughout the book of like justifications for Canada's involvement in World War One. So we're going to expand a little bit more on that idea today.
Well, Kelly, I do think our listeners, hopefully by this point on in their listening experience with us, trust us that wherever we're going somewhere.
We do have a plan. We have a plan.
So trust us, come along. We're going to connect a few things together and make this cohesive. Kelly and I have been sort of circling this conversation, and it's been on our list of episodes and trying to sort of figure out what are the pieces that fit together. And actually, so listeners may not realize when we start a season, we identify the themes, we kind of plot out all of our episodes ahead of time, kind of identify if there's particular birch paths or if there's particular guests. But this is all subject to change because sometimes as we go and we get deeper into these books, sometimes we end up with themes we talked about earlier. Like by the time we get to the episode, we'd sort of put aside to it. We're like, actually, we covered a lot of this already. Sometimes new things emerge that we hadn't really thought of initially, or we shuffle them around differently because they make better sense in a different order.
Yeah, it's very much like a living, active process. And a lot of times our conversations, particularly when we have guests, and we've been so lucky to have so many great guests this season, but particularly when we have guests, the conversations sometimes take turns that we were not necessarily anticipating. And then maybe we're sort of getting to a topic before we even knew we were going to get there, which is phenomenal, but then it does mean we have to pivot. This one was a little different. We had identified this topic pretty early on. Right off the bat, we were sort of like, what's going on with these prophetic dreams?
Right.
I don't think we fully connected all of the pieces that we're going to talk about today until very recently. Like it really did take sort of the cumulative understanding and all the conversations that have come before for us to actually make some of these connections and specifically think about it in terms of like how Maud herself is thinking about this war and the kinds of conversations that she's having, both maybe internally to herself and externally to the people in her world. But before we really get into all of that, Reagan, I know that you are having a very busy spring, and one of the things that's making it extra busy is that your daughter Alice is looking at high schools, which I cannot believe, but here we are. So I have to know, how is that going? How many schools are on the menu? What sort of what needs to be done for all of them?
First of all, it is extremely weird to think that this child, my baby, is old enough for high school.
I know. Stop it. It's insane.
Is it weird? We've gone on a couple of high school tours of various high schools in our area. When she was in elementary school, getting ready to go to middle school, and we did the middle school tour, I was like, wow, these kids look so old compared to like my baby. Oh my God, she's gonna be on campus with these kids and they're so grown. Let me tell you, I did not feel that way when we went on the high school tours. She's walking around, she's chatting with like the high school guides, and I'm like, oh no, she looks like she fits.
Yeah. I mean, she is tall.
Yeah, she's tall.
But also, I think she's just really confident and self-assured. You've raised such a, I don't know, just like a chill, good kid. I can see her not being fazed by the high school students.
So she's looking at the public charter school that she goes to right now for middle school. There is a high school that is an option. It is a pretty small high school, which can be a really great fit for a lot of kids. She is really, really ready for like a bigger pond. So all of the other high schools we are looking at are much bigger schools. So one is the closest typical high school. Los Angeles is kind of weird. We have so many options that you've got like your regular public school, high schools, and you can go to any of the high schools in Los Angeles. We also have magnet schools. So she is looking at a magnet school, and a magnet school, this idea of schools that have specialties and specialty programming and kids from all over the district. LA Unified is an enormous district. It is the biggest school district by population, I think, in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
So kids from all over the district can go to a magnet, and that might be because it's got specialties. Like we've got medical magnets if you're interested in like the medical field, lots of STEM magnets, lots of humanities magnets. And to get into those are a combination of what are called points that you accumulate for going to other magnet schools or coming from an area that has a particular income level, and lottery.
Mm-hmm.
And so she is interested in a performing arts program at luckily one of the high schools that is not super far from us. So she actually has an audition for that this weekend.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yes, it's actually very cool. Like I was super impressed by the tour.
Oh, well, okay, my fingers are crossed. I hope she breaks a leg this weekend. But if that doesn't work out, where else are you guys looking?
The high school that's closest to us is a really good fit. It's huge. She really, really liked that. She could take theater classes as electives.
Yeah.
Which she would love. And because again, this is a weird thing about Los Angeles is that we're this big city, but we also have all these tiny cities that are incorporated within us. And right next to where we live, there's this tiny incorporated city that has its own high school. It's by far the closest to our house. It's got a good reputation. It's got a good theater program too, but she is out of district, even though we live like
closest.
right down the street from it, but it's a different city.
Right.
And so
this is an interesting thing about LA geography. There's a lot of like little donuts where cities have sort of separately incorporated. So they'll be surrounded on all sides by the city of Los Angeles, but that particular neighborhood has also incorporated as its own city.
And so that's a good option too. It's a good school, but basically all the spots go to kids who live there first, in district first. And then second choice is kids whose parents work there in that city. And then if there's any spots left open, then it's lottery. She likes all three of these schools. Any one of these three is going to be a good fit.
Fine.
Exactly. She's going to have a great experience at any one of those. And I think she's ready. All three of these schools are much bigger campuses and have a much bigger student body population. And I think she's excited about that.
Well, I cannot wait to see where she ends up.
Stay tuned for Kelly and I losing it when she graduates from 8th grade.
Oh, I know. I can't believe it.
Let's move into the episode. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that if you're not already hanging out with us on Instagram, you can come join us at kindredspirits.bookclub. And while we're at it, if you've been enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, or wherever you listen. Help us spread the word. Leave a review and let other Montgomery fans know that we're here. And then another great way that you can support our show is by shopping the books we recommend on our bookshop.org link. You can support the pod and support indie bookstores at the same time.
Our kindred spirit of the episode is Miss Gertrude Oliver. She's the local teacher at the Glen St. Mary's School. Now, she's from Lowbridge, but she boards with the Blythes during the week, specifically at Rilla's behest. Rilla loves her teacher. Now, Miss Oliver has some sort of unnamed tragedy in her past, and she is both Rilla's and Walter's special confidant. She's 28 at the start of the war, engaged to a soon-to-be lawyer, and she brings sort of an air of mysticism and a touch of cynicism to the optimistic Blythe house.
Our quote of the episode comes from very early in the book from Miss Oliver, and it's our first foreshadowing of the darkness to come. Rilla and Miss Oliver are sitting in the garden, and Rilla is chattering on about how wonderful June has been, saying it's perfect in every way. In response, this is what we hear. I don't half like that, said Miss Oliver with a sigh. It's ominous somehow. A perfect thing is a gift of the gods, a sort of compensation for what is coming afterwards. I've seen that so often that I don't care to hear people say they've had a perfect time. So you can see this quote sets up the clash in this book between the sunny, perfect youth that Rilla is expecting to have and the darkness of war. And it also sets up this idea that this war is somehow a sacrifice or a price to be paid for something in the future.
Our story club today is going to look more carefully at some of the broader justifications for World War I as seen through the eyes of the villagers of Glen St. Mary. So we had an amazing conversation with Dr. Corey McElhaney a few episodes back about Walter Blythe, and one thing we touched on in that conversation was how Walter's prophetic visions of the Piper reinforces the reader's sense of the inevitability of World War I. Now, Walter was not the only person in Ingleside who was experiencing prophecies related to the war. So too was Gertrude Oliver. She was experiencing dreams that symbolized the war's beginning, as well as some of the vital turning points. And so we were so curious about why Ellen Montgomery was incorporating these prophetic dreams and visions into the text of Rilla of Ingleside, because they seem to establish not just a sense of inevitability about the war, but also maybe just like an all-encompassing justification for the war. So once we had that in mind, we started looking at the characters in the book who had different justifications to support England and Canada's involvement in the war. So in addition to all of our main characters who we've been discussing all season long, there are these really interesting minor characters who are each bringing their own unique perspective about their justification for this war. So, for example, John Meredith has a spiritual perspective. Norman Douglas brings a deeply patriotic perspective. And we see that Gilbert, right, is sort of oriented to honor and duty, similar to what we see from his son, Jem. And so it kind of seems to us that what Ellen Montgomery is doing here is twisting the kaleidoscope, as if to say, no matter how you look at this war, whether politically, patriotically, spiritually, morally, or prophetically, this war was both justified and inevitable. And we really see that the novel validates the war from every possible angle, ensuring that different types of readers find a reason to support the struggle. And perhaps that's a reflection of how the war felt to those who were living through it, like an unstoppable force, justified no matter how you looked at it, even though the cost was so deadly.
And to be clear, we are definitely not saying that the war was justified. We have the benefit of a historical perspective, and we have far more information about the causes of World War I and what came after it than Maud would have had at the time of writing Rilla of Ingleside. But it does seem like she puts a lot of different angles on why the war was necessary into this book. So it's important that we look at them. That doesn't mean we are endorsing them, but I think it's important for us to talk about them. We're kind of talking about three main pillars of justification today. So we've got the patriotism and duty pillar that characters like Norman Douglas, Gilbert, and Jem embody. We've got this sort of religious and moral pillar that John Meredith brings to the conversation. And finally, the prophetic, mythic, spiritual justification for the war, like the cosmic destiny of Walter's Piper or Miss Oliver's dreams, which seems to put almost a supernatural seal of approval on the war. And we also want to talk a little bit about the way that Rilla of Ingleside as a book deals with the opposition to the war by marginalizing the anti-war sentiment with the pacifist character Josiah Pryor, called by everybody Whiskers on the Moon. He is constantly portrayed as ridiculous or even outright traitorous. And certainly Susan Baker loves nothing more than talking about how awful Whiskers on the Moon is. Just so you know, we're going to spend a whole episode on Susan in a minute.
But we are sort of beginning to wind down our season of Rilla of Ingleside, and we've spent so much time talking about our main characters and their growth arcs, and their reactions to the war have been a really necessary part of that discussion, of course. But I think what's different about our conversation today is that we are going to be taking some of the viewpoints and perspectives from these more minor characters and putting them together to see how they create the chorus of voices of popular opinion during that time. And the things I was asking myself as I was reading were, which of these opinions did Maud hear in her real life? Which did she share? Which comforted her? Which did she critique in her quiet way? Which of these opinions did she abhor? One of the things that Rilla of Ingleside does fantastically well as a book is it makes us feel like we are part of this time, like we ourselves are on the home front, worrying about our brothers and friends fighting an impossible war. And one of the ways this book is successful in doing that is by giving us all this buzz, all the conversation, all the sort of like ambient noise of discussions and debates around the war, just like they were actually happening. This really makes me think this is like the Twitter feed of this book. Just like how now we are surrounded by debates and hot takes and all this sort of like public dialogue about hot button issues today, it seems like the Blythes' living room or their front porch was a center of community thought. And then here's poor Rilla, a teenager, hearing all of this without even really the life experience or education to discern which of those opinions make sense to her or align with her values. It's just a really interesting way to bring those conversations about the righteousness of the war into the book without necessarily taking a firm stance on it.
Or is Maud taking a stand? I don't know. Like, and this would be interesting for us to find out.
Yeah.
With a character like Whiskers on the Moon, is she making any kind of pro-war statement by having him be so ridiculous? Or is she just reflecting the pro-war sentiment of the village? Or even poking fun at them when their rhetoric gets so blown out of proportion?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really debatable. Who is the real object of Maud's derision? Is it Whiskers on the Moon? Or is it villagers like Susan who are trading unfounded conspiracy theories about him? Right? So we will do our best to sort through some of those questions today. Before we get to Whiskers on the Moon, I'd love to start us off by looking at this scene in chapter 5, which sort of sums up where public opinion about the war broadly stands right at the outset of the book. So here we are, we're on the Blythes' veranda. It's a beautiful summer evening, and that first round of young men are all enlisting, including, of course, Jem Blythe and Jerry Meredith. The older adults are all gathered together and are discussing the war. And now this is an interesting group. Anne is away, so Gilbert is our host for the evening, along with the housekeeper Susan and Susan's cousin Sophia Crawford. John and Rosemary Meredith are visiting. And now remember that John Meredith is Jerry's father and the Glen's Presbyterian minister, and Rosemary is his new wife. Norman and Ellen Douglas are there. Since Ellen and Rosemary are sisters, they're all each other's in-laws, right? And then Rilla is there too. She's listening in. So, of course, everyone is chatting about the war. It's all anyone can think of. And now the war is very close to home with Jem and Jerry enlisting. There's this very interesting exchange that occurs that shows two very different approaches to supporting the war. Norman's approach is pure patriotism, but John is able to articulate a moral and spiritual rationale. Norman is shouting, and Maud explains that he always shouts when he's excited. Same. And he's shouting about how he would have enlisted if he was younger, and how the Kaiser is bound straight to hell, and the English army will settle Germany once and for all. Ellen, meanwhile, is playing a bit of like an I told you so game with John, as she's reminding him years ago she knew the Kaiser was dangerous, and no one heeded her.
And of course, although we like Norman and Ellen, and Kelly really likes Norman and
I
Ellen,
do.
and it's clear the Blythes and the Merediths do too. I also think Maud is having a little touch of fun at their expense by making Norman's patriotism and Ellen's pedantry seem so bombastic and outsized. There's this wry side comment from Maud when Ellen is asking John to admit that she was right about the Kaiser. It goes like this: Who was right about the Kaiser, John? You or I? Tell me that. You were, I admit, said Mr. Meredith. It's too late to admit it now, said Mrs. Norman, shaking her head, as if to intimate that if John Meredith had admitted it sooner, there might have been no war.
That's just some of Maud's social commentary coming through, right? Ellen is so excited about being right, she's like lording it over John, when in fact, neither of them had any control over these global events. This reminds me so much of seeing folks argue on social media.
Oh my gosh. You know what? It is fascinating to think the way that all of these characters would have interacted on the internet if that was the option at the time. Ellen goes on to pessimistically point out that England's army isn't up to this war, but her husband responds with pure patriotism. Britain hasn't got an army, said Mrs. Norman emphatically. You needn't glare at me, Norman. Glaring won't make soldiers out of Timothy stocks. 100,000 men will just be a mouthful for Germany's millions. There'll be some tough chewing in that mouthful, I reckon, persisted Norman valiantly. Germany will break her teeth on it. Don't you tell me one Britisher isn't a match for 10 foreigners. I could polish off a dozen of them myself with both hands tied behind my back.
Ragon, I am certain that Norman believes this down to his very marrow.
Is Norman the guy that thinks the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun? And he's pretty sure he would be the hero, cool as a cucumber in like that kind of crisis situation?
In Norman's imagination, he is Jack Reacher.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Sure, Norman.
Sure, Norman.
Meanwhile, Gilbert points out that England's navy is ready, and thanks God for that. Cousin Sophia Crawford, consistently a downer throughout this book, says that she thinks this war is punishment for living in sinful times. Oh, we love trotting that one out too, right? And Susan shares the scandalous gossip that Whiskers on the Moon is a pacifist who, quote, says England went into it just because she was jealous of Germany and that she did not really care in the least what happened to Belgium. I don't know whether I'd call that pacifist or I would just call it cynical. Norman is disgusted and says that one of his relatives has similar opinions, but would never say so in front of Norman to fear for his response.
I just keep coming back to this idea of commenting on social media. It's all just so full of these like pithy remarks that seem more meaningful than they actually are. I don't know about you, Reagan, but sometimes I'm like scrolling through Instagram and I feel like I'm participating in like democratic discourse when I like or retweet certain posts that sound really profound or feel exciting or stoke some like sense of fear or anxiety, but it's all just noise. It's all noise. I'm not doing anything. So I'm just struck by the like relatives arguing on Facebook of it all. Norman's comments, especially, very keyboard warrior.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think when we read Rainbow Valley, I said that Norman would definitely be an internet troll.
Oh, yeah.
He is in the comment sections. He is mixing it up with all of the other trolls in there. He loves that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's at this point that John Meredith sort of dips a toe into the conversation in what Maud describes as his gentle, dreamy, but oddly convincing way. He says, without shedding of blood, there is no anything. Everything, it seems to me, has to be purchased by self-sacrifice. Our race has marked every step of its painful ascent with blood, and now torrents of it must flow again. No, Mrs. Crawford, I don't think the war has been sent as punishment for sin. I think it is the price humanity must pay for some blessing, some advance great enough to be worth the price, which we may not live to see, but which our children's children will inherit. Now, this is a new idea. This idea that humanity is paying for some future blessing with this war, that we are buying future peace with war now. And that opens up this moral justification to the conversation.
I mean, you all know I'm not particularly religious, and I certainly don't have any kind of theological study to turn to here. But this line of reasoning is weird to me. It doesn't land for me because it's different than saying that there is this specific good that we must sacrifice for, which, we could debate in terms of whether war is the right sacrifice for it. I can see that justification if there's like a specific good, right, that we are sacrificing for. But he's saying here, this blessing, whatever it is too far in the future for us to even know yet what we are sacrificing for, right? That we're not going to see it. Our children's children will see it. We just sort of have to trust that the sacrifice will have bought whatever that is. I'm having a really hard time with that. Like it's so vague, and I'm not suggesting that like John Meredith should be getting like a receipt from God about whatever this blessing is, right? It's not like we're putting it on layaway. It's so vague, it feels kind of meaningless. You could make that apply to anything.
Right. It's sort of like when people experience a tragedy and someone responds, well, it's all part of God's plan. And it's like, okay, what do you mean it's part of God's plan? Like, what's the plan?
He's kind of suggesting that this idea that all good, everything, he says, everything, it seems to me, has to be purchased by self-sacrifice and that torrents of blood will flow. And certainly this idea of like, I understand like struggle, but I don't know, like applying that specifically to war seems like it's stretching that. I don't know, not being as articulate as I want to be about why this doesn't feel good as a justification.
Norman can't leave well enough alone, though. Quote, if Jerry is killed, will you feel so fine about it? Demanded Norman, who had been saying things like that all his life and never could be made to see any reason why he shouldn't. Now, never mind kicking me in the shins, Ellen. I want to see if Parson meant what he said, or if it was just a pulpit frill. Mr. Meredith's face quivered. He had had a terrible hour alone in his study on the night Jem and Jerry had gone to town, but he answered quietly, whatever I felt, it could not alter my belief My assurance that a country whose sons are ready to lay down their lives in her defense will win a new vision because of their sacrifice. Yeah, so Reagan, what do we make of Mr. Meredith's perspective here?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think Norman asked an important question. So I do admire Mr. Meredith kind of sticking with that,
Yeah.
even if he knows it might come at this very personal,
Oh.
specific cost. And so I do really admire that. What do you think?
Well, I'm really taken with what you said about it being kind of vague. It seems to me that Mr. Meredith is saying that sacrifice, the sort of general and terrible sacrifice of the war, is the mechanism through which a nation, question mark, a people, a civilization, cements its values and maybe even achieves spiritual growth.
Right, moving to like the next step, the next level.
Yes. So, because England and by extension Canada has young men willing to give their lives to preserve a way of life that they think of as uniquely belonging to them, that they're going to be rewarded for that. And I agree with you that this is really where Mr. Meredith's argument starts to fall apart for me. And I wonder if maybe even for Maud, because he just doesn't articulate what the new vision is. What are the specific values that Canadians are being asked to fight and die for? We hear a lot in this book about preserving innocence and sweetness and the safety of beautiful young girls like Rilla and beautiful places like Rainbow Valley. But what is the new world they're fighting for? What is that new level of morality or spirituality or consciousness that they're fighting for? What precisely is that new national value or conscience? We don't know. It's never stated. I'm left to wonder if Maud's failure to articulate that is showing how hollow Mr. Meredith's endorsement of the war truly is.
Or is it that whatever this idea or value is supposed to be, will be, is already so apparent that there's no need to state it? And I think that goes a little bit to like nationalism, where it's this
Mm,
idea of like, because our nation believes in this particular way of life, we don't even necessarily have to articulate how that's different from what, let's say, the Germans believe. It's therefore good, right? Like, I kind of goes back a
mhm.
little bit almost to where Jem was like, if England says we got to fight, then we got to fight.
Right.
Therefore, it must be good. So I mean, I agree with you that I think Mr. Meredith kind of loses me here. And I remember that even as a young person reading the book. I don't blame Rilla at all for seeing war as this like glorious sacrifice, or even Jem and Jerry for thinking of it as a moment for grand heroism. They're so young. But I'm
Mm,
struggling with Mr. Meredith's view, because if that's the justification, then you can justify a lot of wars and a lot of armed invasions as moral. You can take that right back to the Crusades. If what
mhm.
makes participation in war moral is the willingness of young men to sign up to fight for her, wouldn't that also be true of the Germans?
Yes.
And you can also flip it. Does it also mean that if nations have defended themselves but lost, they therefore weren't morally on the right side? Once you poke at
Yeah.
that philosophy, it doesn't hold up very well for me.
Yeah. And I think you made an interesting point about, maybe the shared value that they all understand that they're fighting for is something so obvious it doesn't need to be said explicitly. And if that's the case, are we missing it because we are not contemporaries of this book? Are we missing it because we're not Canadians? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, are we missing it just because we're too far removed from the people here? Part of me also keeps thinking that if it was easy to articulate what that vision of the future was going to be, Maud would have done it.
Yeah. Well, it goes a little bit to kind of the way that we've talked a little bit about like the propaganda
Yeah.
around the war. It's making it this your national duty. And because you are a good son of England, or you're a good son of Canada, and you believe in all of these pure, beautiful things, then therefore it's your duty to defend it. Well, another interesting example of this is a little later in the war, as they're all anxiously following the news of whether Paris will fall to the Germans. Susan is contemplating the troop movement, and cousin Sophia is sure the war is almost lost. And Miss Oliver says she can barely focus on her work, and she feels like she's teaching in a dream state.
Gertrude Oliver, I feel you, girl. Try living in the United States in 2026.
Really, the cognitive dissonance. And Mr. Meredith is wondering out loud why God does not intervene.
Mm,
And when they later receive news that France stood her ground in the battle that came to be known as the Miracle on the Marne, Mr. Meredith summed it up in kind of these religious terms. Quote, God just put out his hand and touched them. Thus far, no farther. So for Mr. Meredith, God is on the side of England and France, obviously, and he is an active participant in this war in a way. But then, if God is a soldier in this war, if he's on England's side, why is this years long struggle? If God can intervene, why only thus far?
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, I think that's a great question, right? If you are Mr. Meredith and you are convinced that success on the battlefield is because of God's divine hand, why is this such a struggle? And I guess if you're sort of characterizing it as the like epic clash between good and evil, then
Right, that part of it has to be our struggle. God
our
can't do
sacrifice again
right,
for whatever this
right,
new
right.
world is going to
That
be.
we have to experience it. We have to go through it. It has to be painful. I guess I've just
Yeah,
answered my own question. Why this far and not
and no farther.
is because the sacrifice is important. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I guess I can
Follow
I
the philosophical
yeah,
thread.
I can see how it connects.
So, as you can tell, Reagan and I are a little dubious about some of these justifications. But so far, those are some of the examples of, I would just say, maybe the different courts of public opinion that we're getting in this book, right? We have the, patriotic zeal of someone like Norman. We have the sort of like moral religious view of someone like Mr. Meredith. No, but both of these views are very much affirming that the war is necessary and important, and that Canada's participation in it, however dangerous, is in fact worthwhile. So the third pillar of justification we are getting in this book is supernatural. I mean, this is Miss Oliver's dreams and Walter's visions, which are telling the reader that there is something grand and mythic and extraordinary happening. I think it's useful to pause a moment and just talk about who Miss Oliver and Walter are and what they represent in this book, because they are both these characters who are supposed to be like uniquely sensitive and wise. And for Walter, this comes through his poetry and his beautiful conscience about the war, which we discussed in detail a few episodes back. And then for Miss Oliver, the school teacher, she's educated, she's introspective. She appreciates Walter's poetry. She has this sort of special kinship with Rilla. She's well liked by all the Blythes. And we also learn that she had some like unspoken of sadness in her early life. And I think that that fact is communicating on some level that she is maybe more highly attuned to the difficulties of life, or just otherwise more sensitive in some way.
Yeah, she has an air of being in touch with something slightly unknowable.
Yeah.
Miss Oliver's first dream is the night of the party at the Four Winds Light. And as she and Rilla are getting ready for their night out, Miss Oliver explains that, quote, it was one of those vivid dreams I sometimes have. They are not the vague jumble of ordinary dreams. They are as clear cut and real as life. And she goes on to tell Rilla that she was, quote, standing on the veranda steps here at Ingleside, looking down over the fields of the Glen. All at once, far in the distance, I saw a long, silvery, glistening wave breaking over them. It came nearer and nearer, just a succession of little white waves, like those that break on the sandshore sometimes. The Glen was being swallowed up. I thought, surely the waves will not come near Ingleside. But they came nearer and nearer, so rapidly. Before I could move or call, they were breaking right at my feet, and everything was gone. There was nothing but a waste of stormy water where the Glen had been. I tried to draw back, and I saw that the edge of my dress was wet with blood, and I woke, shivering. I don't like the dream. There was some sinister significance in it. That kind of vivid dream always comes true with me.
Miss Oliver's dream is super interesting to me because she knows that she has these significant dreams that sort of presage future events. She knows this is something that's happened to her before. So she has this really unsettling dream, but she doesn't make this immediate connection to the war. And this is where I want to talk about the idea of inevitability. Although the conflict in Europe is at the tip of everyone's tongues, even at this point in the book, no one really thinks there will be a war. It made me think about all those sort of so-called unprecedented events that we've lived through in the past decade.
For some precedented events.
I know. No one really thought there was going to be a global pandemic until it was on our doorsteps. We all think that someone else with more power than we have is going to swoop in and keep us safe. They're going to negotiate the truce, cure the disease, stop climate change, whatever it is. We assume it's not going to happen until it's happening to us. And it's not until Jack Elliott announces at the party that England has declared war on Germany that Miss Oliver makes the connection and whispers to herself, my dream, the first wave has broken. And that's when she makes that connection between these types of dreams she has that always come true with her and the war, which no one was able to prevent, and which ended up being as inevitable as the tides. I think the reason that we get Miss Oliver's prophetic dreams is to underscore how powerless the individual characters in this book are to stop the war. For them, it is inescapable.
So I agree with this take, this idea that big forces beyond the Glen were at work, pushing this war forward until it became inevitable. And from all historical accounts, World War I was really this powder keg of a situation with so many alliances crisscrossing, like strings tied to a fuse, that one of those strings getting tripped was a matter of when, not if. I literally remember writing a paper about this in my AP US history class. Thanks, Mr. Baxter. Why I didn't bring in Rilla of Ingleside at the time, I don't know. I
Oh,
could have
dang it,
crushed it.
opportunity lost.
Opportunity lost. Mr. Baxter, wherever you are, I hope you're listening to my podcast.
You taught us so much.
But the interesting thing about this dream is that it sort of elevates the inevitability of it from the inevitability of political alliances and rampant nationalism stoked by their leaders to the inevitability of a spiritual level. Like, am I making sense? Like
Yes,
the difference between an inevitability caused by humans and one that has like these bigger cosmic forces.
yes.
And I think that's where I trip over the intersection between Mr. Meredith's religious viewpoint around like the requirement of sacrifice and the implications of Miss Oliver's dream. Is this war inevitable from a religious viewpoint, or was it inevitable from a human viewpoint? Humans created that situation where it did become inevitable, but was it God or was it humans?
Well, I think what's so interesting is if Maud had only ever shown us the sort of patriotic, nationalistic perspective, the sort of Norman, gem, that perspective, we could have said, well, this was inevitable because of those human connections. But then she elevates it. She elevates these other justifications. She has this sort of religious moral perspective, and then she has this like spiritual, supernatural, like mystical almost perspective, right? That are also confirming that the war is inevitable and right and good. She's working so hard to make sure that the reader agrees that the war was necessary no matter what perspective they look at it from,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. If I'm thinking of this from like a religious philosophy point of view, like Mr. Meredith, and even Miss Oliver as the receptacle of some of these dreams,
Mm-hmm.
kind of this idea that like maybe because humans do make these messes, do make these awful, terrible messes, war is the sacrifice we make to come through it and not make that mess again, if that makes sense. So, not like the war was inevitable in terms of God, but in terms of this type of conflict was always going to come to a head. And I think this was sort of the way that the Great War was talked about at the time. In order for us to not have war again, we need something so bad, nations will never want to do this again, which,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, that did not happen. But I can see that thread there as a way of not justifying it, but making it mean something, like pulling meaning out of something terrible.
Think that a lot of what Maud is doing here with all these varying perspectives and justifications is meaning making for herself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Having lived through the trauma of these war years, trying to find the justification, trying to find the meaning for herself. I think that's happening here too.
Well, Miss Oliver has two more prophetic dreams. One of these precedes the long and terrible Battle of Verdun. That's a battle that began in February 1916 and did not end until December 18th of that year. So that's 10 months, 10 months of the Battle of Verdun. It was a brutal slog that occurred in fits and starts for nearly a year and ultimately claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Miss Oliver's dream starts just as her previous dream did, standing on the veranda steps of Ingleside. A huge thunderstorm is roiling in the east, and then it breaks with blinding lightning and deafening thunder. As she tries to run for shelter, a soldier in a French uniform, blood soaked from a wound in his chest, his face drawn and exhausted, grabs her arm. Quote, but his white face was set, and his eyes blazed in his hollow face. They shall not pass, he said in low, passionate tones, which I heard distinctly amid all the turmoil of the storm. She wakes up then, and she shares the dream with Rilla. Miss Oliver thinks this means that the spring will not bring the big push they are all hoping for, but instead a dreadful blow to France. Rilla points out that the soldier says they shall not pass, and finds hope in that. But Miss Oliver knows from the horror and dread that she felt in the dream that it portends something awful. And indeed, later that day, they get news of the opening of the Verdun offensive. Everyone is glued to the newspaper for weeks, watching the Germans inch nearer and nearer to the French line. In mid-April, the continuous news of the Battle of Verdun once more brings Mr. Meredith, Miss Oliver, Gilbert, and Susan together at Ingleside to discuss the war. Susan, who is now an armchair military tactician, has been telling everyone that Verdun has no military significance, according to the French commander-in-chief, Joseph Joffre. But Gilbert understands when it comes to patriotism, ideas are more powerful than facts. Quote, it's such a titanic thing we can't grasp it. I'm not in the confidence of the occult powers, the doctor threw Gertrude a twinkle, but I have a hunch the fate of the whole war hangs on the issue of Verdun. As Susan and Joffrey say, it has no real military significance, but it has the tremendous significance of an idea. If Germany wins there, she will win the war. If she loses, the tide will set against her.
Mr. Meredith's take, on the other hand, leans once more toward the religious. He is certain Germany will lose because France is on the side of moral goodness. He says that, quote, it seems to me that in France, I see the white form of civilization making a determined stand against the black powers of barbarism. I think our whole world realizes this, and that is why we all await the issue so breathlessly. It isn't merely the question of a few forts changing hands or a few miles of blood-soaked ground lost and won. For Mr. Meredith, this isn't a question of national borders, but rather a battle between civilization and barbarism. And then Miss Oliver asks the question that I think we all ask when we are trying to make meaning from events that feel totally out of our control. Maud tells us that Miss Oliver is sort of wondering out loud, quote, dreamily. And using that word is not a coincidence because we are connecting Miss Oliver right back to her prophetic dreams on purpose. So she's wondering if there will be a great blessing, a reward for all their suffering. She asks, quote, is this the agony in which the world is shuddering the birth pangs of some wondrous new era? Which would be a wonderful justification, wouldn't it, right? That's very much aligned with both that patriotic perspective, right? The war is justified because it preserves national values and identity, and it's very much aligned with the moral religious perspective that the war is justified because it is, morally right. But then Miss Oliver also asks if the war is meaningless in a cosmic sense. Quote, is it merely a futile struggle of ants in the gleam of a million of suns? She wonders dreamily. And I think we get that descriptor dreamily again to remind us that Miss Oliver does have this connection to the prophetic, the universal, the cosmic. She has a perspective beyond that of a mere mortal like Gilbert, even beyond a deeply spiritually connected man like Mr. Meredith. And because she has that perspective, she can ask the unaskable question, what if none of this matters at all? What if we are giving everything and everyone we love for a cause that is ultimately meaningless? Now, Maud, of course, not only couches this question quite firmly as part of the language of dreams, like it's not even a real serious inquiry, but she also has Mr. Meredith shoot that notion down pretty quickly. Because, of course, in the context of when and how this book was published, that kind of sentiment really couldn't be spoken or couldn't go unchallenged. But the fact that that question is on the page, the fact that it exists in this book at all, it shows us that people were wondering if this war was worth it, whether it was as meaningful as the politicians and propagandists would have them believe. It shows that Maud herself was thinking that, or hearing people say that, and she was turning that idea over in her sharp mind. And most importantly for Rilla of Ingleside, it shows that normal people living through this time wrestled with justifications for the war, but still went right on supporting the people who were most impacted by it. Miss Oliver's gentle, dreamy, wondering out loud moment, what if none of this is worth it at all? That doesn't keep her from participating in all the ways the women in this book supported the war and the men who were fighting it. Now, Mr. Meredith quickly assures Miss Oliver that to an infinitely powerful God, the affairs of ants are as important as the affairs of mastodons. And so, of course, God's purpose is being done through this war. We are witnessing the birth pangs of a new era, he affirms. Susan, of course, clucks approvingly at this.
Before we get to Miss Oliver's final prophetic dream, let's shift back to some of the village goings on where we see again how regular people were thinking about the war. So let's go to the Methodist prayer meeting. Miss Cornelia will be there because in the light of her hatred of the German Kaiser, her hatred of the Methodists has dimmed somewhat. She will darken the door of the Methodist church. Everyone will be there, the Blythes, Susan and cousin Sophia, Mr. and Mrs. Meredith, Mr. and Mrs. Norman Douglas, and we are back to our friend Whiskers on the Moon. The prayer meeting was specifically intended to support the men who were fighting the war and put on jointly by the Presbyterian and Methodist congregations in the Glen. And it was not just for the men who were fighting in the war, but for a specific regiment of island men, local men, who had been training in Charlottetown all winter and were about to ship out overseas. They are home for their last leave just before they head to the front lines. So remember that the audience is full not just of families of soldiers, but the soldiers themselves, all local boys and men. So I just want to give that context here for why this specific prayer meeting was called, to be sort of a last community event before these men leave for the war that now, this far on, they all understand the scope of in a different way.
Yeah, it's like everyone's praying on them, which is like a really lovely thing.
Both ministers speak, and Mr. Meredith graciously asked a Methodist deacon to lead the next prayer. So, returning the favor, the Methodist minister asks a Presbyterian elder to lead a prayer, and unfortunately, he chooses Whiskers on the Moon.
Which really begs the question, why was Whiskers on the Moon even there? We know he's a pacifist. This is not his scene. I can see that maybe he sees the value in praying to support the enlisted men, even if he doesn't support the war, but this is not his venue.
Good question. But I suspect there's a great deal of social pressure to attend. Like, this is his church who's hosting it, of which he is an elder. Whiskers on the Moon is a pacifist. And every time I think of pacifist in terms of Whiskers on the Moon, I mentally put that in like scare quotes.
Yeah, I think so.
Because he's a pacifist, but is he? But whatever he is, Whiskers on the Moon still understands the value of showing up in your community, at least for the optics of it, regardless of what you sort of believe. And remember, he's already gotten a lot of blowback from the community for being a pacifist. Like, his windows got broken by boys in town. He's also painted as being rather pompous and full of himself. So I would guess he thinks he's an important personage in this community and so should be there in a big community event. I suspect it's less for religious reasons, but that's just me. But regardless of his reason for attending, once given the platform to speak he does. And his prayer was more or less an appeal to end the war. Quote, he prayed that the unholy war might cease, that the deluded armies being driven to slaughter on the Western Front might have their eyes open to their iniquity and repent yet while there was time, that the poor young men present in khaki who had been hounded into a path of murder and militarism should yet be rescued. The congregation is shocked. They're like paralyzed. They can't, this is like a moving train. They're paralyzed. They can't seem to stop it. But Norman Douglas, who is not troubled by either indecision or decorum, responds by leaping over his pew, eluding I'm picturing him like a football player, like dodging the opposing team, eluding his wife's grasp, tearing up the aisle. He ignores Mr. Meredith's attempt to stop him, and he grabs Whiskers on the Moon by the collar, thrusts him out the choir entrance, all while shouting a variety of vaguely church-appropriate epithets like indecent reptile, honestly gonna steal it, and whited sepulcher. The ministers quickly end the prayer meeting after that scene. No one's going to be able to concentrate after that. And once home, Gilbert confesses to Anne, quote, Norman Douglas did a wholly indefensible thing, said the doctor. Pryor should have been let severely alone until the meeting was over. Then later on, his own minister and session should deal with him. That would have been the proper procedure. Norman's performance was utterly improper and scandalous and outrageous, but by George, the doctor threw back his head and chuckled. By George, Anne girl, it was satisfying.
Gilbert. I mean, this is one of the great scenes in Rilla of Ingleside. I mean, first, it's just genuinely very funny and exciting, right? To think of Norman Douglas, like you said, bounding up to the front of the church like a football player, hurling these sort of PG-13 insults at Whiskers on the Moon. Like, he can't call him what he really wants to because they're in a church, so he comes up with these sort of other euphemisms, and ultimately throwing Whiskers out of the church altogether while everyone is looking on in sort of mixed horror, but also not a little amusement. But it's also such a brilliant way to demonstrate the different perspectives of the war by the Glen villagers and how they react to dissent, right? Showing how closely held their beliefs really are. That actual quote we get from Whiskers on the Moon, I mean, there's a little bit more context to it, but I think at its heart, it's not that outrageous. He's asking that the poor young men who have been sent to war under what he believes to be false pretenses be saved. And of course, with hindsight and history being what it is, I think Whiskers on the Moon had the right idea. But giving voice to those ideas, especially in this time and in this setting, was met with outrage and near violence. For many villagers, that patriotic justification of the war ran really deep. So much so that any dissent is unbearable. Norman, of course, represents that like very extreme response, but we see that Gilbert, who we think of as being very moderate in his views, he was perfectly happy to see Whiskers on the Moon handled that same way. And again, I think we know exactly what this is like now, right? In modern day, with the political divide being as stark as it is now. It's a lot of dissenting viewpoints that people can't even stand to hear, can't stand to be in the same room as. So it's also interesting to me how Maud is once again expressing a controversial idea, in this case, that British citizens and soldiers have been lied to and are sacrificing their lives for a meaningless war, but then she immediately undermines that idea with the reactions of the other characters. And to be honest, I'm not sure what the goal is. We are talking to some scholars in the next couple of episodes that might give us some more context for this, so stay tuned. But at a minimum, it seems like she's trying to give us examples of every type of opinion about the war that was out there at the time. And I think it's also very possible that she was wrestling with these less popular ideas herself, and was trying to navigate her way through coming to terms with the war in light of her own patriotism, her faith, and her lived experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because Whiskers on the Moon is set up to be this wholly hateable character. But I am going to point out, and he's saying these, again, quote, pacifist things that everybody is taking quite huge offense to. But I'm going to point out a couple of things just for context around Whiskers on the Moon here. So I think first is that we have to consider that he's painted as a very unlikable man from the very beginning of the book, way before the war starts, like before we even know about the war. So he's a pacifist, but he's also like a jerk overall. And his pacifist viewpoints are only one way in which he's being a jerk. Like he's a controlling dad to Miranda, say, for instance. I do think in the context of this particular prayer meeting, it's less his expressed views of war, and he picked the wrong time, the wrong audience, and the wrong words for this screed. If he had stuck with praying for peace, that the war should cease, that all the men should be safe and not have to participate, it might still have gone over with a thud, but not with this kind of like shock and alarm that everybody had when they were listening to him. If you think about the words that he was using, like deluded and iniquity, I think basically accusing the men sitting right in front of him of murder and saying that the men who are already fighting are basically going to hell if they don't repent wasn't actually going to be useful or dissuade anyone from going who had already enlisted.
He was being purposefully inflammatory.
Yes, that's a good way of framing it, right? He was being purposely inflammatory as opposed to taking this moment to really, like, if he's a pacifist, really pray for peace. And I'm always a little conflicted because, of course, you should speak up for your morals and your values, even if they're hard for other people to hear. But I think it's all tied up in his like general jerkiness as well and his pomposity, right? That makes it harder. The fact that Maud puts those thoughts in the mouth of such an unlikable person, it's like she's telling us that we should react this way to it, right? All this to say, I do agree with you, of course, that the belief that the war in general and at this war specifically is a horrific waste of life is actually deeply moral. I just think that Whiskers on the Moon is not really a good example of a true pacifist. Like Maud isn't having a real debate here the way that she almost tiptoes up to with like Gertrude Oliver or Walter. She doesn't fully let them get there, but like she tiptoes around some of
Mhm.
those things. I mean, we hear that Whiskers on the Moon tells people in the general store when the Lusitania is sunk that the people who died on the Lusitania deserved their fate because they had been warned of the danger and they got on the boat anyway. And that doesn't strike me as the belief of a pacifist. That seems very mean-spirited as opposed to somebody who deeply objects to meaningless loss of life. So I think that she's not really giving those views a fair shake in this moment because she's put them in the mouth of such an awful character, a character that she's telling us, like she wants us to laugh at the image of Norman Douglas shaking him in front of the whole church, right? And like bodily throwing him out of the church. That's funny, but mean, right? Like that's not really, if that happened in real life, I don't know if I'd laugh at it.
And I think she doesn't just want us to laugh. She wants us to like cheer Norman on. She wants us to be the Gilberts, right? The ones who are like a little shocked at the indecorousness of it, but who are excited about what it means and what it stands for. Whenever Anne and Gilbert sort of co-sign something, that's Maud telling the reader, this is how you should also feel about it, I think. They represent those sort of more middle of the road. They're not really extreme either way.
Very reasonable. We've spent the last 7 books believing in them as people, good-hearted, deeply moral.
Exactly right. So when we sort of get their stamp of approval, then we're like, oh, okay, this is what we're supposed to do. So I do think that's what Maud is hoping for, that we will react to that scene like Gilbert. Gosh, Reagan, you said so much that really like was setting the wheels of my mind turning. I love what you said about how Maud walks up to these dissenting ideas with Walter and with Miss Oliver, but she doesn't quite get there. And then of course with Walter, she like backtracks quite significantly, right, as he has sort of an about face. And instead, all the dissent just gets poured into Whiskers on the Moon, who is so unlikable and we're not meant to take him seriously. And like you point out, he's sort of internally inconsistent in his beliefs.
Right. We've got Susan constantly pointing out that he's not just like a general jackass, right? And
Right.
a pompous blowhard. He's actually like a German spy. Like we don't have it. He's not a German spy to Glen St. Mary. What is he spying on?
He's spying on Susan.
He's spying on. He is. She totally. I can't wait to talk about Susan, man.
We're gonna have so much fun. And I just think that's the big question. Why? Why is that where Maud put all these dissenting beliefs? She put them all in this incredibly unlikable character. We understand that Maud herself was deeply conflicted about this war.
Eventually,
that's true. That's a good point, Reagan.
because I think that there's a big difference between knowing where Maud ended up in her views of the war and where she was at the time that she was writing Rilla, which was immediately post-war, probably riding like kind of like the high of the armistice, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that so much of what's happening is her reckoning with her own reactions to the war. And I just think it's interesting that she buries these dissenting ideas in such an awful character.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at any rate, Whiskers on the Moon's prayers are not heeded, of course, and the war drags on, brutal and terrifying as ever, but the people of the Glen somehow have to keep living their lives. And, I am just so happy that we are reading Rilla of Ingleside this year, and listeners, I hope you have gotten some comfort from it as well. I don't think that we could have possibly known what we were in for in 2025 and 2026 when we discussed this final book in the Anne series, but it has been such a perfect companion to these tough times. I know we are all really struggling with what we're seeing in the news. I certainly am. I know Reagan is watching the United States government occupying an American city, watching extrajudicial executions happening in the street, illegal takeovers of other sovereign nations, and that's just January, folks. Who knows what's going to have happened by the time this episode comes out, but it is just very, very hard to watch all this unfold and to hold on to our grief and our humanity and still wake up in the morning and go to work and parent your children and make dinner and celebrate birthdays and do things that bring us joy. And that is exactly what this book is all about. Living through extraordinary times, painful times, living through grief and trauma and fear, and still caring for a colicky baby and making dinner and going to church and celebrating weddings and Christmas.
And hating a green velvet hat.
and hating a green velvet hat. Yep.
In sort of the back third of the book, we're spending a lot more time in the mundane. We're hearing about troop movements right alongside baby Jim's developmental milestones, the fate of Venice and Paris and Jerusalem alongside preparations for Easter supper. It's like very surreal how mundane it is all at the same time. And amid all of this turmoil, we have a couple of interesting moments where our characters are finding comfort from intuition or trust in something other than their belief in the military might of England or the godly righteousness of the war. Not necessarily Gertrude Oliver level premonitions, but some other kind of intuitive sense. We know that in May of 1918, Jem Blythe is reported wounded and missing, which throws Ingleside into chaos. The characters are all experiencing panic and terror, mingled with the hope that he might be okay and the reality that they have to continue on during these days and weeks, ultimately months of not knowing whether he's alive or dead, safe or in danger, and carry on they have to through a new daylight savings time change. Susan is opposed. I'm with you, Susan. Whiskers on the Moon is in favor, which must mean in Susan's eyes that it's practically tantamount to German support.
I can't believe that they decided to start daylight savings time in the middle of World War One.
I don't
Whose
know.
idea is that? These people do not need any more stress in their lives.
Right? There's a new star in the sky as well. And Mr. Meredith comes over to join Miss Oliver, Rilla, and Susan at Ingleside to try and see the new star in the sky. And for once, the conversation does not turn to whether the war is necessary or just or important. At this point, late in the war, with Jem missing, it seems like none of that really matters anymore. And instead, they're focused on this bright little beacon in the sky. Rilla wonders where Jem is, and she's holding faith that he's still alive. The Ingleside family has decided to trust the instinct and intuition of Dog Monday. And since he has not howled, they are hoping this means that Jem is still alive. Quote, "It was absurd and irrational and impossible. But Rilla believed it for all that, and Mrs. Blythe believed it, and the doctor, though he smiled faintly in pretended derision, felt an odd confidence replace his first despair. And foolish and absurd or not, they all plucked up heart and courage to carry on, just because a faithful little dog at the Glen station was still watching with unbroken faith for his master to come home."
Am I ever going to not cry when we talk about Dog Monday? I don't
Never.
think so. Never.
Absolutely never.
Oh my goodness.
New stars and loyal dogs are not the same as newspaper reports, but at this point in the war, it seems like symbols and metaphors are more comforting than news from the front. I think they've all sort of learned that they can't even predict things that they thought would be easy were very, very hard. Things that they thought that they would lose, they won. That it's just more comforting to trust in some symbols and metaphors, in instinct and intuition, than to try and parse meaning from the newspaper every day. With Jem missing, all the Ingleside people can do is keep faith. And maybe that's easier to do when you put your trust in dogs and stars instead of prime ministers and military commanders.
Miss Oliver has her third prophetic dream. Quote, "Rilla, it was a good dream. Listen, I dreamed just as I did 4 years ago, that I stood on the veranda steps and looked down on the Glen. And it was still covered by waves that lapped about my feet. But as I looked, the waves began to ebb, and they ebbed as swiftly as 4 years ago they rolled in, ebbed out and out to the gulf, and the Glen lay before me, beautiful and green, with a rainbow spanning Rainbow Valley, a rainbow of such splendid color that it dazzled me. And I woke, Rilla, Rilla Blythe. The tide has turned." And once again, Miss Oliver's dreams are correct. It is the beginning of the end of the war, at least. News comes in slowly, but the Allies are winning major battles. Things are looking up, and in September 1918, they finally hear from Jem. Rilla takes the call that comes from the telegraph company with the news that he has escaped and is, quote, quite well. And as she is hanging up, her mother is standing there, in her robe with her hair down, eyes shining, and asking whether it was word from Jem. Rilla says she doesn't know how her mother could have known, but she did. Quote, "She was awake, and she heard the ring, and she knew that there was word from Jem." Anne's revelation, of course, coincides with the symbolic turning point of the war. Just as Miss Oliver's dreams shifted from waves of blood to an ebbing tide and a rainbow over Rainbow Valley, Anne's personal resurrection morning signifies that the darkness of the conflict is finally lifting. The moment Anne knows Jem is calling, she is described as looking just like a young girl again, signaling, I think, that restoration of joy, maybe,
Yeah.
after years of her stiff and starched smiles. So, Anne too gets this little prophetic moment. Motherly instinct daring to hope, or is this another example among the many in this book that there was a supernatural element guiding them through such terrible times? It does seem like one final confirmation that intuitive faith over logic and reason is a perfectly valid way to navigate the trauma of this wartime experience. Every character in Rilla of Ingleside, no matter how minor, has their own relationship with and understanding of their country's involvement in the war. We have those who considered it their patriotic duty or a matter of national honor to fight for England no matter what. And we have the moral and religious perspective that Mr. Meredith provides, even if we aren't exactly clear on what his vision of a better world that would be worth this sacrifice would look like. And then we have this third sort of otherworldly perspective that the war was somehow foreordained or part of the cosmic movement of the universe, much like the stars. And then added to all that, Rilla of Ingleside also gives us this little undercurrent of dissent. Dissent that, yes, is usually swiftly silenced, but is on the page regardless, for us to read and consider and make up our own minds about. For a book that is supposed to be about this naive and sheltered young girl's view of World War I from the Canadian home front, Rilla of Ingleside is a rich text that gives us insight into the real life opinions, conversations, and explanations that everyday people were engaging with.
Oh my gosh. I'm sure we could continue to talk about this very issue even more.
Oh, yeah, there's so much here.
And listeners, we would usually put a birch path here, but to be honest, we've had so many amazing scholars and guests on this season to add context and nuance to our Rilla discussion. We just did not have any specific ideas for research to add here. And we've been running on rather long for most of our recent episodes. So I think we'll just move into maybe having a puffed sleeve moment because it has been a while since we've done that. And puffed sleeve moments are those little moments that are extra. They didn't fit neatly into the main part of the episode, but we still wanted to talk about them. So here we go. Puff sleeves are back, baby. So here's mine. Just as Dog Monday is a totem of faith and loyalty and that intuition of goodness, the Ingleside cat, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, also a metaphor. Susan says that he is at his most evil and most Mr. Hyde-like whenever the Germans are about to score a victory or have just scored a victory. So I'm not sure what sort of cosmic plane the Ingleside pets are living on, that they are getting news that the rest of us have to wait for. When the news of the armistice finally comes, Susan reports that Mr. Hyde has been scared off by seeing Bruce Meredith walking on stilts in the garden, and she thinks that he is gone for good, thus symbolizing the cosmic retreat of the Germans forever. As a cat lover myself, I think Susan may be over-attributing some of the cat's contrariness to somehow being a German sympathizer, because I know that my cat will also go from sweet snuggling to biting my arm in an absolute flick of a tail. And he's also been known to rocket up and down the hallway at 3 a.m. and yowl weirdly. So I don't know, maybe international politics is as good an explanation as any.
Yeah, who knows what messages Griffin is getting from the universe?
Honestly, maybe I should start tracking where it's like one of those like Griffin was being really out of control last night and then looking and seeing what the front page says the next day.
It might be a worthwhile experiment.
I don't know. Anyway, how about you, Cal? You got a puff sleeve?
I do. The little moment that really sings to me when we're thinking about dreams and like coping with war and tragedy is this scene where Miss Oliver and Anne are talking about using dreams as like a private escape. Anne says, quote, "All my life I've liked going to bed to have a gay, mad, splendid half hour of imagining things before sleeping. Now I imagine them still, but such different things." And Miss Oliver agrees and says that her dreams and visions haunt her too. And I just really related to that. I love that little scene. Ever since I was a little kid, I can always make myself fall asleep easily by imagining myself in my like sort of secret imaginary fantasy world. I've recently named it the Kelly Cinematic Universe when I've described it to other people, but it didn't have one for a very long time. But it is like a very real place in my mind, right? With its own like geography and architecture. And I can go there very easily most of the time. But when my life is really hard or sad, all of a sudden it can feel impossible to get there, right? Like I lose access to that fantasy world. So I really related to Maud's observation that external anxiety and fear and dread, it's all encompassing and it can intrude on even our most private and internal moments.
Yeah, it's a very sad little example of how many things the war has stolen, including stealing from Anne, the person who has always found in the hardest, awfulest times of her life such solace in her imagination. All of a sudden, she can't do that anymore.
Yeah, the war stole Anne of Green Gables' imagination. Like that is the most tragic.
Or stole her imagination as her safe place.
Yeah. Oh, well, kindred spirits, this has been yet another very heavy episode in a season of heavy episodes. So, for our Inspired By, we would love to share some recommendations that are just bringing us a ton of joy right now. So, by the time this episode comes out, this will probably be very old news, but like so many other people, I fell really hard for Heated Rivalry this winter. The TV show on Crave in Canada and HBO Max in the US is full of romantic longing with a heavy dash of spice. I watched it, I loved it, I rewatched it, I made everyone I know watch it, I made my mom watch it on Christmas. Sorry, and you're welcome, Mom. And most importantly, I read the book it's based on. The book version of Heated Rivalry is honestly even better than the show for my money, and it opened up the world of Rachel Reid's Game Changers series to me. I'm not a sports romance person at all, but these books are pretty darn great. So I'm recommending the Game Changers book series generally for those of our listeners who love romance, and I have to especially highlight Tough Guy, which is the third book in the series, because Anne of Green Gables plays an important part in it. The main character in Tough Guy is a big, burly, red-headed hockey player with debilitating anxiety, particularly around flying, and he carries with him his trusty copy of Anne of Green Gables every time he has to get in a plane. So he always has a happy, comforting place to go to when he needs to, feel grounded.
Oh my gosh, really? I love that so much.
So great.
Nothing makes me happier than the thought of like a big manly hockey player loving Anne of Green Gables.
He has this like battered copy that he like keeps in his bag. It's so great.
Kelly, in this imaginary universe, he listens to our podcast.
Oh my God, he totally does. Call us Ryan Price.
He totally does. All right. Well, Heated Rivalry is on my list to both read and watch. I just haven't gotten there yet. I generally love preaching the gospel on why big kids and teens are awesome and little kids always get all of like the parenting glory. I will say the hard thing about having a teenager is that her bedtime, she is still reliably up at 9:30 or 10, like not always in her room. And we are a one TV household, which means there's not really a lot of safe times to be able to watch something spicy that's not going to be interrupted by a curious kid. I do miss the earlier bedtimes.
I would say send her over to my house and then you could have a free weekend. She could do a slumber party here. You can watch the series, but honestly, she might end up watching it at my house.
Kelly, you are the bestest auntie to Alice, but I do not trust you to not show her Heated Rivalry yet. You're like, I'll just fast forward over the spicy parts.
Don't watch.
Close your eyes. I'm not going to be a prude around what she watches, but there's a big jump there.
It's too spicy for kids her age. It is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here is something light and fun from me. This was a surprise hit of a gift from the holidays that has resulted in absolute uncontrollable laughter for us. My nephew gave us a game that's called Let's Hit Each Other with Fake Swords. That's literally the name of the game. And it does indeed come with fake swords. Basically, it's like a card collecting game, but if two people want the same card pile, they have to fight each other with the fake swords, following whatever silly rules are on those cards that are up for debate. And I've seen nothing funnier than my niece and nephew fencing while they had to keep their knees together and they had to yell a compliment at each other every time their sword hit something. So they're running around, like hobbling around or hopping around with their like knees pressed together, yelling, I like your shirt. Your toes are nice. They start running out of compliments. My favorite one, my nephew yells at my niece. He's like, "Your face is kind of mid." And we're like, "That's not a compliment, Briar. You got to come up with something else that doesn't count."
Oh my God, these kids are savage.
Judge rules foul.
That sounds hilarious,
It's
though.
it's very hilarious. Almost caused a few injuries, so play at your own risk. Very funny, very silly. It's nice to have something dumb and silly that makes us just laugh really hard.
Oh, that sounds like a great game.
Yeah, so play it with some kids in your life or just watch. I didn't have to play. I just watched and like took video.
Just like rent some preteens to play. Let's hit each other with fake swords.
Oh my gosh. So Kelly, do you know what has now become a family tradition of a game in our Christmas game at our house?
Tell me.
I blame my husband. Listeners, feel free to blame my husband if you want to play this at your house too. It's called Tortilla Slap Fight.
Oh, yeah.
And if you don't know how to play, this went around on like, I don't know, TikTok. Everybody has a tortilla. You fill your mouth full of water and take turns smacking each other with tortillas. And the first person to spit out their water loses. And with the kids playing it, let me tell you, nobody ever lands a slap. They just look at each other. Somebody raises a tortilla and that's it.
And they just start laughing. Yeah.
Yeah. My youngest niece, my younger of my two nephews, have never successfully kept any water in their mouth ever.
That would be me. I would just be so struck by the ridiculousness of the situation. There's no way I would make it past the first slap.
And when we play at their house, we add in the chaos of their dog who's running around trying to snatch the tortillas from everybody.
Of course, naturally, yes. For the dog, this is like prime snack time opportunities.
Exactly. So if you have some leftover tortillas and you want to play this game with your family, do play it outside. The water does go everywhere.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Well, kindred spirits, we are so grateful to everyone who's been listening and sharing the podcast. The messages and reviews mean the absolute world to us. So please feel free to drop us a line either on Instagram, or you can go ahead and email us at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com. We love hearing from you. And if you haven't yet, you can rate us 5 stars wherever you listen. It helps more Anne fans find our cozy little corner of the internet. And if you email us about your review, we will send you a sticker and a thank you note. Just a small way to send a little bit of Green Gables charm your way. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and we hope you will join us in 2 weeks for another episode of Kindred Spirits Book Club.
Bye, Kindred Spirits.